What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and we're back for another episode of the Super Smash Brothers and Platform Fighter tutorial series. So in today's episode, we are going to be going over the coin game mode or match type. And specifically, we're going to be making sure that we can attack our opponent and get some score for doing so. Because right now we have our default, which is based off of time. We have our stock, which is based on a number of lives. Then we've set up this coin game mode, but we haven't really done anything in it yet. So the coin game mode is a timed mode where the score is not based off of KOing your opponents or knocking them out of the blast line, but instead collecting coins. So when you hit an opponent, they will drop some coins and you are able to pick them up. Getting hit does not reduce your coin amount. However, if you are KO'd, you will lose coins at that point. At the end of the time, whoever has the most coins wins. And if there is a tie, it goes to sudden death, and sudden death does not rely on coins at all. It is standard sudden death, which we already have. So specifically in today's episode, I want to go over attacking opponents and creating some objects, which will be our coin class, and then this coin class will be able to be picked up by our character. Now, if you want to get caught up in the series before you check out this episode on coins, you can check out how we've done our hitboxes, our game modes, our floating player tags, and a lot more in the entire playlist, which will link right here in the top right corner. Alternatively, if you only care about the coin game mode, I do recommend you watch the other game mode episodes. I'll link you to where we did our time game mode right here in the top right corner so you can get familiar with that process. But with that out of the way, we can go ahead and get started. This is a code and blueprint tutorial series. We're going to be doing pretty much all of our logic in the code today, if not all of it. So starting out, we want to make our coin class. This is what we are going to be creating when someone gets hit by an attack in the coin game mode. So starting out, I'm going to go to my C++ classes and the folder I want to put this class in, which for me is an SSB template. And I'll put it in here. I am going to add a new C++ class. If you're in UE4, the process is very similar. Then you can go to Common Classes and just select Actor, because that is the basic object that can be placed in the world. We don't really need any more functionality for now. We can customize it to our liking. Next, and I'm going to call this Base Coin. So if we do want to have different variations, like bigger coins or different coins for more points, we can do that. You could also use these for things outside of this game mode. If you want to have coins you can pick up for currency in the game, or if you wanted to have a story mode where defeating opponents dropped coins you could collect, it would be a very similar actor, if not the exact same one. So this is going to be base coin. Choose where you want to put it, and you can make it public or private if you want. So far in this series, I've been doing everything the same, putting them in the same spot. So I'm going to keep up with that process. So create class. And you can see it created the base coin class. So if I go back to my Visual Studio, I have this pop-up here saying I can reload the files, which I am going to do. But again, if you don't get this, it's perfectly fine. You will be able to see it here in this folder. If anything, just stop the editor and refresh the folder structure. At this point, I'm going to do some generic cleanup that I usually do in these files. And there we go. You don't have to do any of that if you don't want to. I just like to clean it up in a way where it follows my coding standards and the way that I would like my code to look. So at this point we have an actor that represents our coin. And there's a couple things we're going to want on here. One being a static mesh so that we can visualize it to being a collider or some sort of collision, and 3 being a value to the coin. That would likely be sufficient for now, although there's plenty more that we're going to add. So starting out for this, we can add a few new components. Let's add a static mesh component. So we're going to say the static mesh component of the coin. It's going to be U static mesh component pointer. And we'll call it static mesh component. Now to actually have this type, we will either need to include the static mesh component.h file, or we can forward declare it with class. I've spoken about this in many of my episodes, so you're probably familiar with it. But either way, let's just set up our static mesh component like this. Next one would be the collision, so we will say the box collision component of the coin. This is class uBox component pointer, and we want to call this collider component. And for both of these, we'll want to make these U properties so that we can edit them and access them in the blueprint. So I'm going to put the same in each, and I'm going to copy what Unreal typically does for their components. So we're going to make this visible anywhere, which means we can see it from anywhere, but we can't necessarily edit it. So one example is we can't edit it while we're in a blueprint graph, which we may need to, but we can update if we do need to. Blueprint read only. This just means that we can access it in the blueprint, but we can't modify it, which is, again, perfectly fine. Then we want to give it a category. So category equals, and you can call it whatever you want. I'm just going to call it components. And for components, we typically keep them protected or private. So if you want to be able to edit and access or even visualize these values in the blueprint as protected values, we need to add a tag that Unreal can look for. So meta equals, and we're going to say parentheses, allow private access equals true. And I have extra quote here. Should actually look like this. Meta equals allow private access equals true, in quotes like that. And I'm going to copy this view property and paste it for my box collision component, or my box component here. They're going to be the same right now. Then we can make an integer, so say the value of the coin, and we'll just make this a U property that is edit anywhere, and blueprint read write with a category of coin, just straight up coin. And we'll call it int value. Now we'll probably modify this further, but for now I just want to have something in here as an example for our coin. And now we can go to the basecoin.cpp. In the constructor here, I like to create a section where we set up components or actor components. So setup components. Since we're in an actor and not a character, we need something called a root component. We need to specify what the parent component is or the root component is of all the other components. Each actor has the ability to access this root component because it's expected that they will have one. So you can directly set the root component equal to something. I want to set my static mesh as my root component. So we can do this by typing root component equals static mesh component. But we want to set up our static mesh component first. So we don't have to do that right now. I just want to keep that in mind so we don't forget. Now we have to set up our static mesh component. So to do this, we can type static mesh component equals create default sub object. And you put angled brackets and we put the type of the object we're creating, which is a U static mesh component. We don't need to include pointer here. We're just wanting the type. Then in parentheses, we have to put the name of this. So I'm going to do text. And how do we want this name to display in the blueprint? I'm just going to call it static mesh component, and I'll put it in Pascal case, which is capitals for every letter at the start of a word. Now we've created this component, we would typically attach it here, but if we're setting the root component to the static mesh component, that won't be required. So next one here is going to be our box collision component. So if we go collision or collider, let's change it from collider component to collision component. Collision component equals create default subobject. And we want this to be a uBox component. And we want to do the same thing here. So text. And then in here, I'm just going to say collision component. And now the collision component is going to be attached to the mesh since it is the root component. So collision component, arrow, setup attachment. Let's set it up to attach to the static mesh component. You could set the root component earlier and then attach it to the root component. So an alternative to this is to set the root component after creating the static mesh component and then attaching the collision component to the root component. Either way works, so I'll keep it like this. That looks good. But we also need to include our static mesh component and uBox component in our C++ file, our CPP file, because otherwise we will not be able to access these types. So we can go pound include, and we want components / box component.h. I believe that is correct. Looks like it is, but let's build to make sure. And it is. So we already get the static mesh component for free in an actor class, but the box component we don't, so we have to include it. Now below this, I want to set my default values for variables. So set default values for variables. And I just want to take my value, which is my coin value, and set it equal to 0. We also have an episode on initializer lists if you want a slightly faster way to set up values in your constructor. We'll go over that later in the series, but feel free to get a head start if you want. Now we can launch the editor. Once the editor is back open, we want to go and create our blueprint class for the coin, or the base coin BP. So I'm going to go to where I want this to be made, which is in my blueprints, functional VPs. I can put it in objects or items, but wherever you want is good. I'm going to choose objects, and then I'm going to add a new blueprint class. We can go to all classes here, and we want to find our C++ coin class that we made. So I'm going to type base coin, select it, and then actually press select. At this point, I'm going to call it base coin BP, and I can go into it now. Once you come into the blueprint here, you should see that everything we set up is present. So on the left side with our components, we have our base coin BP, then we have a static mesh component under it, and then we have a collision or a box collision component right under that. So I'm going to clear out any nodes that we have in here. I don't need any logic in here for today's episode, but I want to be able to go to my static mesh component and set a mesh on it. What you're setting doesn't really matter, just make sure you can do it. That means you set it up correctly. So I will pick this random mesh, this wedge mesh, and I can put a material on it if I want to. This will eventually be our coin material and our coin mesh, but I don't have it as of today's episode, so that will be the near future. Then we can go to the box component or our box collider, and I can change the scale, or the location, the rotation, or other settings of it as well. And you can see this right here, but I'm not going to keep any of these changes. I want to revert everything. I'm just doing it as an example to make sure that we set everything up properly. Additionally, if we go to class defaults, we should be able to see our variables. So specifically, we want to see value here, which we can. It's in our top right under the coin category. So we can change this if we want, but again, leaving it alone for now. We'll do a lot more setup with this in the future. So there's the start to creating our coin game mode, and that is making our coin class. If you're interested in seeing more, then please subscribe, because we have many more episodes on the way for this series and several others. If you want to support the channel further, you can check out the Patreon, YouTube membership, or Discord subscriptions to help benefit the channel and myself, which I would really appreciate. If you ran into any problems while following this episode on creating a coin class for your coin game mode, feel free to check out the Discord community. There is a link in the description. I would be happy to help you with any problems you ran into along the way. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.